In this video, we're going to cover how to go about getting the highest rent possible when investing through Section 8. So let's jump right in. So something to be clear on with Section 8, which a lot of so-called gurus are downright misleading on, the amount of rent that you can achieve when participating in the program. This is because the payment standards, which are the amounts that the Public Housing Authority will pay for rent, which are based on the FMRs, which is the amount that HUD will set for a given area for rent based on bedroom count. Both represent the max that the Public Housing Authority will pay. Important distinction to make here is the difference between the max amount the Public Housing Authority will pay versus the actual amount that you will get paid for your property. Often the payment standard for a Public Housing Authority not only includes rents, but includes utilities as well. So that payment standard that they have listed includes additional costs on top of the rent. Irrespective, the payment standard isn't necessarily indicative of what they will award you for your property. Ultimately, the Public Housing Authority will take a look at comparables and make a determination of what they call rent reasonableness based on what's being achieved by comparable properties in the private market. So if you have a 3-bedroom property that you list for $1,500 a month for rent, at the time of inspection, the Public Housing Authority will take a look at comparable properties within the same area to see what those properties are achieving with rent, and based on those rents will determine what rent they'll award you for your home. If the comparables for your property are showing rents for $1,100, $1,200 and you're renting your property out for $1,500, the Public Housing Authority is very unlikely to award you that amount, and much more likely to award you an amount closer to the comparables that they're seeing. This is a critical concept to understand when getting into Section 8 investing. The good news is there are ways you can maximize the amount of rent that you will be awarded and have ultimately approved by the Public Housing Authority so that you're maximizing your cash flow to the extent possible. The ability to execute in this area is paramount for success for obvious reasons. If you're not maximizing your cash flow, the appeal of Section 8 really takes a hit. All this going through inspections, dealing with the government, all of this is so that we can get paid more. If that's taken away, while there are still other advantages to Section 8, it's just not the same thing. So make sure that you're executing in this area so that you're successful and that the strategy makes sense for you. Now, in order to do that, there's a few areas in your approach that you can execute on to really give yourself the best shot at getting the highest number. The first one, which we've touched on repeatedly, we'll touch on again here, is to land a quality property in a quality area and land quality tenants. This will not only ensure that you'll hit the different marks on the checklist the inspector has, but it gives you a better shot to having appealing comparables rent-wise in the surrounding area for them to go off of. Quality home in a quality area isn't just about landing quality tenants, it's about achieving quality rents. A home in a higher crime area or a less quality area will get a lower rent. So like we said before, and we'll say it again, find deals in quality areas and land quality properties and put a quality tenant in there. It's going to set you up for success in every other area. Secondly, you want to be cognizant of the different amenities that you're including and what the pros and cons of each are. A common example of this is whether or not to include a washer or dryer. There's nothing explicitly stated in the Public Housing Authority's inspection list that says you are required to include a washer or dryer. However, doing so will not only give you a better shot to land a quality tenant, but it will also allow you to have a better shot to get a higher rent when the inspector is looking at what you're providing. A home that includes a washer and dryer compared to an exact same home that doesn't should be able to achieve a higher rent, and you can justify that. Similar aspects around utilities, whether or not you are paying for all or some of them, whether or not you're including lawn care, whether or not the appliances are updated, even the aesthetics of the home. Does it look updated? Does it look modern? Things like the countertops, paint. These can all play a factor in how the inspector goes about the comparables, which ultimately determines what rent gets approved. So be mindful of that and crunch the numbers on what amenities you're going to include and what you aren't. There are different opinions in this matter. I'm of the opinion that you include a fridge, you include a stove, which, by the way, those two things are required. If you don't include them, the tenant must bring them. I also like to include the washer and dryer. The caveat to that is whenever possible, I will have the tenants be responsible for the water. If I'm including a washer and dryer, I don't want to be on the hook for the amount of water that they're using. Sometimes a tenant can try to make extra money by doing the laundry for their neighbors, and that can run up your water bill. Alternatively, a really good way to achieve high rents is to include all utilities. So say that property you have that you would list for rent for $1,500. If you included all utilities, you could list it for $1,800. And then you could write in the lease, if the utilities exceed $300, the tenant is responsible for the difference. That way it protects your downside, but you're still able to rent it out that max number. Because you're including utilities and you're including the amenities, you're more likely to get that number approved by the housing authority as long as it falls within the payment standard for that municipality. Thirdly, this is perhaps the most important aspect of this, is to both be realistic and firm about the number that you want and be prepared to negotiate for that number to the extent needed. This is where some people can get caught up. They don't like having difficult conversations. They're not great at negotiating. They can back down in situations where they should step forward and stand firm and fight for the number that they want. In general, if you're uncomfortable with negotiating, my advice is to get comfortable and get comfortable quickly, because it's paramount in several aspects of real estate, including this one. After the inspection is done, the inspector will either approve the rent on the spot, or it will be sent to the public housing authority and an analyst will approve the rent you're looking for based on the results of the inspection, and you'll be notified via physical letter, which will also be sent to the tenant. Irrespective of whether or not you're notified right away or at a later date, if you are not awarded approval of the rent that you're asking for, you should never accept that lower number without a fight. More often than not, the public housing authority will simply default to giving you a lower number as a general practice. Remember, from the housing authority's vantage point, they need to balance two opposing forces. On one hand, they need to offer rents through the program that are enticing for landlords so that they have landlords participating and providing homes where vouchers are accepted. On the other hand, they need to be responsible with how they spend the limited funding that they have so that they're not overspending. Additionally, they need to ensure that they're not artificially inflating the rents in a given area. So they want to provide high rents so that you, the investor, will participate, but they don't want them to be too high where they run out of money or they lose their funding because they're being irresponsible. Housing authorities are audited and they have to justify the decisions they make. So in order to make sure that they're not overspending, they'll try to lowball you and approve a lower number than you're looking for, hoping that you won't push back. Successful investors will always push back. The best way to approach this negotiation is to use data to your advantage. Because the housing authority gets audited, they need to show a justification for the decisions that they make. You can help them do that by providing data that shows comparables in the area with the same level of quality that are providing the same amenities, same bedroom count, same bathrooms, that are achieving the higher rents. As long as you can do that and show that those rents are being achieved, they have the data that they can use to justify the decision to award you the higher rent. If responding to the initial denial with data alone isn't successful, the next step is an even more powerful strategy, and that is to have the prospective tenant negotiate on your behalf. In effect, what this means is have the tenant be a pain in the butt to their caseworker so that the caseworker approves the rent if for no other reason, so they don't have to listen to the voucher holder complain. These are government employees, people just like anyone else. They're generally underpaid. So if you present a situation where you're not getting the rent you need, you You try to negotiate, they're not budging. You tell the tenant, hey, I'm not getting the number I want. Go talk to your caseworker, see if you can get them up to this number. Tell them how much you want to live in this property, and then we'll be able to rent it to you. They can go down the public housing authority, sit down with the caseworker, and complain about how they're not able to move in this home they really want to move into. The caseworker is going to be much more motivated to get that rent approved if it gets their voucher holder off their back. As long as you provided quality housing, followed everything to a T with the inspection, or within the payment standard, or providing amenities, have provided data on the comparables, and you set the tenant loose on their caseworker, you're in a really good spot to get the max rent possible. If you don't do these things and you just blindly accept what the housing authority approves, chances are you're going to get a lower number than you otherwise could have. As a general rule of thumb, a good benchmark is to expect around 80% of whatever the payment standard is for the area. You can often get higher than that, but when you're penciling out a deal, that's a good baseline to go off of. Another thing I'll reiterate here is to be realistic. Do not base the numbers on the deal on the max. Remember, the payment standard is the max amount the housing authority will pay. There are anomalies where they may pay a little bit more, but generally speaking, you can think of it as the max amount. And the housing authority will almost never grant that full amount. And this is where so-called gurus are really being unethical and telling people who are paying money for advice that they can cash flow at X based on the payment standard, when they know that it's very unlikely that they'll achieve the full payment standard. So use 80% as a baseline to set a realistic expectation and make sure the deal pencils out at that baseline. And if you get more, great. So land quality properties, quality tenants, include amenities as necessary, provide data, stand firm, push back, negotiate effectively, and set the tenant loose on your behalf. And you should be able to land some pretty good rents that are at least 10 to 30% above what you otherwise would have been able to in the private bet. And once you're able to do that and get the rent approved, the next step is to have the tenant sign a lease. You sign the contract with the public housing authority, and then you're in business. You're ready to set the move-in day, start collecting rent, and start making that cash flow. And with that, I'll see you on the next one.